Good morning, and we're still in chapter 271. Siman Reish Ayin Aleph of the Alter B'Shulchan Aruch, the laws of Kiddush. And we're still in our discussion with regard to one who began eating before Shabbos started, and this meal was being carried over into Shabbos. But that part of the discussion we've settled, and well, actually, the Alter was going to incorporate a little recap of the bottom line shortly in the next level. So we'll see a little bottom line factual recap of what to do after the whole discussion. That's going to come to us by way of something else, which is somewhat a similar discussion, which is not people who were eating before Shabbos, but people who were drinking before Shabbos. A club that shall not be named. I'm kidding. So people are drinking before Shabbos. Let's see the halacha. Yadalit 14. Yeah. Shnayim shayu shoisin achag marasoda. Two were drinking after they've already finished eating and they benched. They did the whole thing. So it's unrelated to a meal anymore. And they said, and they said, Bo v'nekadesh kiddush hayoim. Let's now recite kiddush. Let's make kiddush. They said to each other.
Early Shabbos.
Yeah, that's right. It's before Shabbos started. So they're saying, let's make kiddush. Let's start Shabbos. Why not? We're here. This is something that could happen by mistake at such unnamed clubs where someone says, I'll make kiddush, everyone. When he says that, certain halachas kick in. Namely, even though the time for kiddush has not yet arrived, it is forbidden for anyone to drink until they make kiddush. It's a big kiddush. In the footnote, they explain how the Alter Rebbe got there from our Gemara, based on a Rambam. But essentially, it comes down to this. In the same way, we said earlier, someone says, let me bench. That statement, let us bench, ended his drinking meal, and he may not drink. And if he does, he has to make a new bracha. Right? Okay, the eating doesn't end when he says, let us bench. That'll end when he does the Ma'am Achronim. But the drinking will end when he says, let us bench. So derived from a Rambam, the Alter Rebbe concludes that the same thing is true with the declaration, let us make Kiddush. A person says, let us make Kiddush, that itself is an introduction and a desire for Shabbos, even though the time for Shabbos hasn't come yet, and therefore I'm not allowed to drink till I make Kiddush. So if you're at one such club and someone says, hey, let's make Kiddush, and everybody else says, nah, forget it. We run into a problem at the moment.
For that person, not for the rest.
That's a good question. So
because they denied it, they didn't want to. That's
a good question. So if let's look at the Alter Rebbe's language precisely. Two people that were two that were drinking after the meal's over, while it's still day, and they said, and they said in the plural. You're right. That's notice that when I was reading that. They said, so you're right, so that person would be an issue, or whoever else agreed. And said, yeah, good idea, let's make Kiddush. Then he can't drink until he makes Kiddush. Now, and if they decide, you know what, let's continue drinking without Kiddush, we'll do Kiddush later, considering that Shabbos hasn't started yet. Although this is inappropriate, because once you've decided to take on Shabbos, you now should take Shabbos. They're now obligated to make a Be'er Peragafen on anything they'll drink subsequently. Because they said, let's make Kiddush, they have declared ending their meal until they make Kiddush. And therefore, if they change their minds and decide to continue drinking without Kiddush, they have to make a Gafen.
It's a break.
It's a break in the meal. Right. So they shouldn't drink without making Kiddush so two things happen when they said, hey, let's make Kiddush. First of all, they ended their drinking meal. And therefore, anything they drink after requires a Gafen. A. B. They've invited Shabbos upon themselves by saying, hey, let's make Kiddush. Or at least they expressed intent to invite Shabbos. And therefore, they have to follow through with that intent and actually make Kiddush. If they violate that and drink, then the other issue kicks in, which is they made an end to their meal and have to make a new agafen. Clear?
If they decide to do kiddush, do they say that since they're carrying over their drink, they don't have to say the bracha?
But if they make kiddush right away, they follow through with their intent. So they said, hey, let's make kiddush. And then they follow through, they make kiddush. Einam tzrichim levarach al koshel kiddush. They don't have to make a bracha gofen on that kiddush. Commotion is bar l'mayla, as we explained before, because the cup carries over from before the obligation to the after the obligation, from before the break to after the break. So ironically, they say, hey, let's make kiddush. If they were to go through with that, no nuah gofen. If they don't go through with it, yes, nuah gofen, because that intent ended their meal. But if they go through with that intent, then by doing so, they've carried the wine with them from before their kiddush to after their kiddush, and no nuah gofen. There's the irony again. Right? Because when they said the statement, let's make kiddush, they ended their desire to drink, but they didn't end the desire to drink kiddush. They actually are carrying their desire for kiddush drinking with them in that statement.
Transformed into a different.
Correct. So when they said, hey, let's make kiddush, they ended their desire to drink, with the exception of the one cup of kiddush, that they have not ended their desire to drink. They actually expressed intent to drink. And if they follow through with it, that intent and that statement carries the kiddush with them, carries hagafen with them through. But if they don't make kiddush, and they decide, you know what, let's just go back to drinking, they have to make a new hagafen.
Isn't it a violation to, if you drink too much?
Certainly, but I'm using funny language to describe drinking so much, but it doesn't have to be so much. It could be a sip of wine, and then it doesn't have to be. Yeah, it doesn't have to be necessarily excessive, right? It could be a, what's the word? Frugal amount. Okay. Yeah, clear. All right. Tezvav. Now, in general, all the halachas above were founded on the principle that we had from our Gemara in Psachim, which is that from the moment the obligation of Kiddush kicks in, one is forbidden to eat until they make Kiddush. Which is why they have to break the meal and make a Kiddush, which is why we ran into this whole discussion as to how you have to do that. But it comes down to this halacha that one may not eat from when the obligation kicks in until they fulfill the obligation. The rabbi discussed it this morning with shofar. Person wakes up in the morning, the obligation of shofar kicked in, no eating or drinking until you fulfill that obligation. No eating, I should say, not no drinking, right? That's the uniqueness of Kiddush, you can't even drink, right? Because when it comes to Kiddush, there's a preference that it be done as early as possible. Whereas when it comes to shofar, there's no preference that it be done early as possible. There's just, it has to be done. And therefore, no eating a full meal before I do shofar, lest my meal make me forget that I have an obligation. But a snack, a person is allowed to, and the rabbi discussed that in detail this morning, right? He discussed the details of what the various customs and the drinking and the eating and all the rest of that. But when it comes to, okay, so that was the reason for this whole halacha, is because of the moment that the obligation for Kiddush sets in, which is, as the Alter Rebbe said, at Ben Hashmoshes, when the sun sets, no eating or drinking until one makes Kiddush. Now, therefore, based on that, still from back to our Gemara from Psachim, even though, as we stated, it is forbidden to eat or taste anything, any food or drink. It doesn't say eat, he says taste. Not to taste any food or drink before one makes Kiddush from the moment that the sun sets. Im shachach, if he forgot, unintentionally. Oy avar, or intentionally decided to transgress this. The Tom, and he ate something. He didn't do what he's supposed to. Okay? Right? Afilu, that's right, it's similar to the halachas we learned in Havdalah. Afilu achal suda gemura. Even if he ate an entire meal, he ignored the halacha and just decided to eat a whole meal. Or he forgot. The moment he remembers, hey, I have to make Kiddush. He has to make Kiddush right then. Or the moment he does teshuvah and says, okay, you know what, this is silly. I gotta make Kiddush. Right? So he has to make Kiddush right then and there.
What if they were drinking mashka? You can't say that it doesn't count as a Kiddush, because you have to say gufen for a Kiddush.
Right.
So
you're going back to the previous halacha about drinking before we're talking about.
Yeah, they're drinking mashka, okay?
Yeah.
Scotch, vodka, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And they say,
hey, let's make Kiddush.
hey, let's make Kiddush.
They have to bring wine, but they wouldn't be allowed to drink anything until they brought that wine and made Kiddush.
Yeah, but if they don't have the wine,
then go get wine. This goes back to Halacha we discussed earlier. That's one shouldn't use that. Okay, but we're not going to go there right now.
Wine that doesn't have sulfites. Somebody's allergic to sulfites, and if you don't have organic wine, actually, it's almost impossible to find wine.
It's so
natural.
Okay,
Grape juice would be, of course.
Grape juice, or better use even bread. Okay, we're not going to go right now because we discussed halachas about that. We'll try to stay on topic.
Grapes. Crush grapes, you can crush them.
Not on Shabbos, but yes.
No, not on Shabbos.
But grape juice.
Yeah, grape juice, absolutely.
Yeah. You can always get organic grape juice now. That's all sulfites.
Okay, we're going to leave those halachas alone right now. Okay, so again, where are we? The person forgot the halacha or intentionally transgressed the halacha and ate when he wasn't supposed to, namely after the sun sets. Before Kiddush, he didn't make Kiddush yet and he's eating, although he wasn't supposed to. So the moment he realizes that, hey, I should really be making Kiddush, either because he forgot, now he remembers, or because he decided this is silly, what am I breaking the halachas for? Let me follow the instructions. So at that moment, he has to make Kiddush. And he may not eat anything or taste anything, mishin nisker, from the moment he remembers, until he makes Kiddush. Right? So all the halachas that we said earlier about the guy who did it right, which is he started his meal before Shabbos, and as soon as Shabbos came in, he stopped, he covered his bread and made Kiddush with all the halachas as they're supposed to be done. This is a guy who's doing the same thing, but after Shabbos started, because he forgot that he wasn't supposed to eat, or because he intentionally said, I don't care, and then decided, you know what, I should really make Kiddush now. So now he's got to do the same thing. He's got to cover the bread, make Kiddush the moment he remembers, and he may not partake or taste anything until he does that Kiddush. So this is where the Alter Rebbe is now going to give us a little recap of all the halachas in their bottom line. He's not going to go through the whole discussion again. He's just going to tell you what to do based on the whole discussion again, which is the bottom line. Namely, so the moment he remembers, make Kiddush. And therefore, number one, he should not make Bayir Peragafen when he's making Kiddush if earlier in that meal he drank wine. Number one. Number two, and likewise, if he makes Kiddush on bread, because there is no wine present, he wouldn't have to make Hamotzi on that bread if he already ate bread earlier in that meal. And then three, even if he is making Kiddush on a cup of wine, he doesn't have to make Hamotzi on the bracha that he's going to, doesn't have to make Hamotzi on the bread he's going to eat after the wine, because of the doubt, there's an opinion which says he shouldn't. Commotion is boil as explained above. So that's a little one sentence recap of all the halachas and discussion from before, but in this time he's just applying it to someone who's using it after Shabbos started because he violated the principle he's not allowed to eat now. And then he decided, oh, you know what, I got to follow this law halacha. So he covers the bread, makes Kiddush. And whatever brachas he already did, he doesn't do now. That's the bottom line. I made Hagafen before, no Hagafen now. I made Hamotzi before, no Hamotzi now. But just Kiddush.
This whole thing is, but really the best way to do it is to bench before
Shabbos starts. That's right. But it's too late for that now. It's already after Shabbos and he continues eating.
These are the summaries of everything if you didn't.
Correct. If you didn't bench before Shabbos started, because the best thing would be to bench before Shabbos starts, Mincha, Ma'ariv, and then.
This is the best protocol after.
That's correct. Correct. If Shabbos already set in, this is what you have to do.
Right.
Either Shabbos set in and as you were supposed to, you didn't eat anything and you're doing this. Mm-hmm. Or Shabbos set in, you violated the principle, did eat something and realized, hey, I should really be doing Kiddush. Because it's only once Shabbos started.
Yeah, that's the best one.
Now here's an interesting halacha, which was briefly touched upon earlier. And the Alter Rebbe is going to reiterate it now. And it's in parentheses, which indicates perhaps that it's the Alter Rebbe's Chiddush. And here's a unique halacha. Let's see. So now, what if he remembers after he completed his whole meal? So till now we're talking about someone who violated the principle. Shabbos said and he keeps on eating, he doesn't care, or he doesn't remember. And then in the middle of the meal he decides, you know what, I should really be doing Kiddush. Okay, so he covers his bread, makes kiddush, no hagafen if he did it earlier, no hamitzi if he did it earlier, and he goes further, continues his meal. All beautiful.
This is another case where.
And now the guy finished his meal completely. No, let's say he benched.
Oh, he benched.
He finished his whole meal and he benched, and then he realized, oh my gosh, I never made kiddush. So he realized he has to do teshuvah. What kind of thing is this? Like skipping kiddush. So what does he do? What's his question now? Well, he has to make kiddush certainly because he remembered now. But what's the question that's on our table right now?
Does he have to make another meal?
Does he have to make another meal now? Because halacha is the kiddush has to be done in the place of the meal.
In vain because you already just benched.
Here's our question. So what do you think the answer is? Does he have to wash again and make another meal? From everything we know so far, he finished eating.
Yeah, he does.
Why do you say so?
Because he benched.
Huh?
Because he benched.
But why do you have to make another meal now?
Because
kiddush has to.
Because he's starting over.
This is what you would think.
Oh, no.
But that's not the halacha. And this is the chiddush of the Alter Rebbe here. And we'll see why in a moment. And when you see why, you'll understand, you'll see where the Alter is coming from. So let's see. In the parentheses. If he only remembered that he forgot that he failed to do kiddush after he completed his meal, he finished benching, he's done. He does not need to eat again after that kiddush. So that the kiddush be in the place of a meal that follows the kiddush. Doesn't need to do that. Why? Because he ate the meal after nightfall and after Shabbos began. That meal is called his Shabbos meal. And when we make kiddush right afterwards, that constitutes a kiddush in the place of the meal instead of a meal that is going to be, as it should have been done. It's a meal that was
retroactive. What they call that?
Who does this follow? Who does this follow? Rabbi Yossi in the Gemara. Rabbi Yossi in the Gemara said, to begin with, you're allowed to do this. Because as the Alter Rebbe said earlier, there's an opinion which says that kiddush in the place of your meal doesn't necessarily mean in the place of the meal you're about to eat. It could even be in the place of the meal you just ate. And therefore, to avoid making an extra bracha that's unnecessary, namely washing again, eating hamitzi again, which you're not interested in doing because you just finished the meal, and then benching again, to avoid that, rely on the opinion which says that the meal you just ate, that will be the meal upon which you recite kiddush. And the kiddush will be in the place of your meal that you just finished.
I just did the reverse.
That's right.
Yeah.
Which means that kiddush would have to follow immediately after your benching. But if some time elapsed, it's no longer in the place of your meal. That's what he says here in footnote 82, or is it 81 or 82? Usually the footnotes pop up when I put my cursor on it, but it's not. What does it say in footnote 81 or 82? Okay, not.
81 says, note the contrast to subsection 12, which outlines the laws.
That's 81 says? Okay, now 82.
This ruling applies when he recites kiddush.
Oh, louder. This ruling applies when he recites the kiddush directly after his meal.
There's an interval before.
But if there's an interval
before he remembers,
he's
required to eat at least an olive-sized portion.
Now I found it. There you go.
Yeah.
The ruling applies when he recites the kiddush directly after his meal. If there's an interval before he remembers, he's required to eat at least another olive-sized portion of bread after reciting kiddush, as per Mishnah Brura. So here's an example of where you see the Mishnah Brura relies heavily on the Alter Rebbe. The Mishnah Brura was written after the Alter Rebbe and was written as like a bottom halacha compendium to the Shulchan Aruch, of Rabbi Yosef Cairo, and he borrows and relies heavily on the Alter Rebbe. So here you see he takes the Alter Rebbe's ruling and then qualifies it, if you will, right? Which would fall in line with everything we learned so far. Okay. Yes. Related to this halacha?
Yeah.
Okay, so ask if it's related to this halacha.
So when he benched, and it was already time for kiddush, did he say recite?
Did he say recite in that benching?
Because if he didn't, it seems to be.
Well, we don't know what he did. The question is, what should have? He probably didn't because he forgot. But what should have he done? What did we learn yesterday? What should have he done?
Yesterday we learned that you should say it because once the time for Shabbos kicks in.
If you ate, that's right.
Right, you say
because you ate.
Recite.
That's right. The only time you wouldn't is if you stopped eating before, even though you're benching after, right?
Here he forgot, but then
Which means he should have missed it, I'd say, yeah.
Does that constitute a proper benching for Shabbos?
Well, the benching is done anyway. You can't repeat benching because you missed recite. The halachas that are different, but I don't think you can repeat it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think so.
Because
Good question.
now the halacha is saying you're treating that benching as a Shabbos benching.
It's a Shabbos meal. He's treating it as a whole Shabbos meal, which would mean you would have to say recite. What he did, I don't know. It doesn't say, but because this person
he didn't because
he forgot.
It was even
Yeah.
part of the Shabbos. He didn't consider it part of the Shabbos.
Yeah. Okay, let's conclude the halacha. Now, so far we covered that the person remembered in the middle of his meal after Shabbos started. He remembered that he wasn't supposed to be eating, so he breaks his meal, covers the bread, and goes through the Mapah. He covers the bread, makes kiddush, and no hagafen if he drank wine, and no hamotzi if he ate hamotzi. Now, if you remembered after benching, make kiddush right away, and no need to eat afterwards, because the meal upon which he's making kiddush just finished, relying on that opinion. Now, the im niskar acher sheberach hamotzi. What if he remembered after he made hamotzi? So he started a meal after Shabbos began, forgetting that he wasn't supposed to. He washed, sat down, made hamotzi, kaidim shatam prosas hamotzi, but he didn't take a bite. He made hamotzi.
He didn't take a bite.
And he didn't take a bite.
Remembered at that moment.
Remembered at that moment.
Oh,
it's an awkward moment to remember. So what does he do now? She says, "Lo KIDDUSH AFTER THE MEAL." You can't now stop and make kiddush and wine. Mapah. Kiddush. He's forced.
You have a dangling bracha there.
It's a good way of putting it. He's a dangling bracha. So he's required now. It's a good way of putting it. It's a dangling bracha. He's required now to eat from the bread. Kaidim kiddush before kiddush. We're very sorry you have to do that. So that his blessing of hamotzi not be in vain, because it's dangling there, as you said it. Yeah. Ella yikadesh alapas. He should make kiddush on that bread. So he makes hamotzi. He's about to eat it. Oh, so he just pulls it out of his mouth and says, "Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, asher baruch banu mikol ha'am." No, that's the Yom Tov kiddush. No, I keep on forgetting this kiddush. And then he eats the bread.
Yeah.
So he converts his ordinary eating bread into a kiddush bread. Now, actually, the right way to do it is, as the halacha is, to make a hamotzi on the entire loaf. So he's holding presumably a whole loaf. Maybe not two, because he forgot about Shabbos, but he's holding a whole loaf. So he's holding a loaf, makes hamotzi. He's about to cut it to eat it, and remembers he has to make kiddush. So he holds the bread and just keeps on going with kiddush. Quite a cool halacha. Even though he doesn't have a second loaf, and therefore we have to break and wait. Hey, bring me a second loaf. That doesn't constitute as a break. So halacha is anything you're doing that's related to the eating doesn't constitute as a break. So, for example, I don't know,
getting the salt.
Exactly. This whole thing of saying nu we all do it when you wash. You say nu
Right.
Not exactly very halachically commendable behavior. You're better off not doing any nu'ahs and just saying pass the salt when you need it. Because anything that's related to the eating of the bread is permitted to be said because it's not a break, because it's part of the eating. And therefore, asking for a second loaf is part of the eating process, and therefore you're allowed to. Which is why, by the way, someone just asked me this today. You make ha'etz on Rosh Hashanah tomorrow night. What is it, tomorrow night? Oh my gosh, tomorrow night. And you say the hiratza before you eat the apple. Not a break, because it's all part of the process of eating.
After you say only if you let it die, you can still say something.
Only if it's related to the eating.
You can still speak.
Only if it's related to the eating. Yeah.
Pass the salt.
Yeah. So it's best not to. The reason why it became that people don't do it is because observers don't necessarily see the distinction.
And
So it's become people don't understand why you're doing that. So it's best to avoid all talking to begin with, because especially when the people around, they don't understand what you're doing, or children, why you're talking, it becomes confusing. But in theory, this is correct. At any rate, the point he's making here is that asking for that second loaf to be passed to you to make lechem mishnah is not considered a break. And that's what he says here. Even if he's going to be required to speak and tell them, please pass me a second loaf. I want to make lechem mishnah. This is not considered an interruption, because it's required for the eating. As explained in chapter 167.
What if there's not a knife? Can you answer a knife?
Same thing.
It's related to the eating.
Anything that's related to the eating.
Okay,
in fact,
so
Halacha says you could even say, did you feed the animals outside yet? Because Halacha is you're not allowed to eat before you feed your animals. So if you're about to eat and you're not sure if you're allowed to say, hey, did you feed the animals yet? Otherwise, we can't eat now. So it's related to the eating, and therefore it's allowed to be spoken. Obviously, we try to avoid that.
If you have help, for example, at home, I try to do it before always. Make sure that the help is eaten before we eat.
Mm-hmm.
So like Rabbi, with the Hanasi, you want to make sure that he at the same time as this, he considered it for his, he called his servants his masters.
Yeah. Rambam uses that language also.
Yeah. Can you make it on one loaf if you don't have a second?
Good question. My answer, I'm going to.
It's just for the Jew, right? They cover the bread.
Good question. So Alan's asking another question, which is, I was thinking that when I'm looking at the footnotes now, let's see the footnotes, if they address that. So we're talking about someone who made hamotzi when Shabbos started. He washed, made hamotzi, and at that moment remembered, hey, I have to make kiddush. And the Alter was telling him, take that bread and turn it into your kiddush bread. Right? Now, even though he's going to be required to ask for a second loaf and he'll have to wait and instruct him to bring it, do so. Wait, so you made hamotzi, you bring a second loaf, takes a couple of minutes, takes a minute or two, and then you keep on going into the kiddush. Okay? So what happens if the second loaf is not available? Can he go through with the kiddush now? My gut answer is going to be yes.
I think so, yeah.
My gut answer is going to be yes. And then you'll have to, I'm not sure how to make up the lechem mishnah later.
Would you ask for the habit though, the matzah or something?
Yeah, anything, a pita, a bagel, any
But
whole.
You can't do it on the spot, but sometime in advance, you're allowed to take a loaf and cut it in half.
Depends how it's baked, but yeah,
That's not ideal.
Yeah.
You know.
So let's see, what are the footnotes number there? So first I want to show you footnote 83. If he recites the blessing very paragraph and partakes of the wine, he will have made an interruption between the blessing hamotzi and partaking the bread. This would cause that the blessing to be considered as having been recited in vain.
He has to do it over
right?
the bread.
He should, however, recite the kiddush blessing after the blessing hamotzi before partaking the bread. When reciting kiddush in this situation, he should not recite the passage beginning Yom HaShishi, because that would be a break. Because Yom HaShishi is customary, not the halacha. The essence of the halacha of kiddush is that second bracha we make declaring the sanctity of Shabbos, and that's the only one you're permitted now to insert. Now you cannot make the Yom HaShishi then, right? Yom HaShishi would have had to have been done before hamotzi, but you forgot before hamotzi. Okay, and then let's see. 85. I.e., even though he already recited the blessing hamotzi, he may tell someone to bring 2 whole loaves. When they are brought, he recites the blessing of the kiddush and then partakes of the bread.
Most likely they'll have 2 loaves of bread because it's fried.
It doesn't say what happens if you don't. My assumption is going to be that he should go ahead with kiddush even with 1. That's going to be that's my gut. At any rate, I really hope that none of us ever end up in such a situation where we're sitting down for a meal on Friday night and forget that it's kiddush. But if it ever does happen, you now know what to do.
Because it didn't happen on a Friday night that we were supposed to go out and it was canceled at the last minute, and we were stuck at home.
Yeah,
and we didn't have loaves of bread, so I just took 2 slices of bread.
that's definitely recommended. And a better practice is come knock on my door. I'll give you. I'm serious. I'm down the block. Just come knock on my door. I'll be happy to give you. We always have 2 pitas or something in the fridge, in the freezer. Okay.
Can you make it on the zones? No.
So that's a good question. You're asking if you make it on a mazonis, not a cookie, but a mazonis pita and a mazonis bagel. You absolutely could make your hamotzi and and kiddush and lechem mishnah.
And
the reason is not just because there's an opinion. You actually, the Sephardim especially, this whole Ashkenazic business of making hamotzi, making mezainis on pizza and pitas, they think it's silly, and they're more than likely right. The making mezainis on mezainis bagels is only when you're eating that bagel not in the context of a meal. If you eat, which is very, how exactly do you find that? Are you sit down for a sandwich that doesn't constitute a meal? Which is why the Sephardim, many of them would just make hamotzi on everything, including pizza. There are some pizza shops in this town. If you ask the guy behind the counter, is this hamotzi or mezainis, he'll laugh at you and say, "What do you mean? All pizza is hamotzi." That's what he'll tell you. There are some pizza shops in the city that will tell you that, right? But okay, Ashkenazim, we say we make mezainis, whatever. We'll leave it alone. Especially with a slice of pizza, maybe you can get away with saying, "I'll grab a slice of pizza, go to the car, and drive off." So maybe you can count that as a snack. But when you're sitting down for your Shabbos meal and you're taking 2 pizzas, even though the package says mezainis, you're sitting a meal on those pizzas, and if for sure you have to make hamotzi. Same thing with 2 bagels, certainly. Even if the package says mezainis. Mezainis only means if you were eating in the context of a snack, you're allowed to make mezainis.
What you say mezainis?
If you were eating in the context of a snack, you could make mezainis.
If you don't have the bread,
no, you make hamotzi. Because you're establishing your meal on it, you make hamotzi. In fact, even on a Tuesday, if you bought a pita and the package said mezainis, if you're sitting down to eat dinner with that pita that you just bought, you ought to make hamotzi because you're sitting down for a meal. The fact that the package says mezainis is only if you're eating said item in a snack form. But if you're eating it in a meal form, it requires hamotzi. So if you're taking 2 bagels in this case and using it for lechem mishnah, you would certainly make hamotzi because you're establishing a Shabbos meal on these.
Some people, for example, some people's snack is their meal, or some people's meal is their snack.
That's the thing. When this big question, by the way, comes up on Pesach,
right?
There are many which rule that cracker-shaped bread is mezainis, and it's a big question. How do you make hamotzi on a matzah? It's a cracker-shaped bread. Why are you making hamotzi? If they were to cut that up and put that into tam-tam shape, we'd all be making mezainis, right? So how do you even get away with making hamotzi on? Okay, so the end is because we're eating it as a meal and it's being established as the Shabbos and Yom Tov meal, that itself turns it into hamotzi, right? So it's the establishment that I sit down at a meal to have a formal Shabbos meal that makes that item into hamotzi. So certainly that's the case with your pitas, even if the package says mezainis.
But it depends on the quantity also the person eats. But sometimes the person's quantity is such a big snack that for another person that's a meal.
That's another consideration. When the line between snack and meal is in my establishment and also in quantity, right? But when it comes to Shabbos, even if all I ate was a bite size, as per the minimum halacha of how much I have to eat, the fact that I ate it in the context of sitting at my Shabbos meal would mean I make my hamotzi.
So it's what's your intent?
The intent is a part of it, as well as both are. Because the halacha says once you get to a certain quantity, you cannot impose your intent on the quantity. Meaning, if the quantity is that universally this is a meal, you can't say, "Oh, I'm snacking on a big snack."
I think the threshold's very low. It's a gazayas or
it's a bit more than that for this threshold, but I'll never discuss it in detail.
That makes perfect sense because the fact that if a certain quantity is considered by somebody else, even if the person has a big snack.
So there are universal standards that a certain amount equals meal, even if your intent is snack, which is why in some places they'll tell you 1 slice of pizza mezainis, 2 hamotzi, because once you hit 2, you've already passed the threshold of what universally is accepted as a meal, and therefore you can't say you're snacking, even if you are snacking, but you're breaking the universal, universal threshold for meal eating, and therefore you'd have to wash. So this whole business with
I generally wash even on 1 slice.
Yeah, when we learned these halachas before, when we learned this halachas about breaking in the middle of a meal, I mentioned then that it's quite clear from the halacha that the halacha wants you to treat all eating with the dignity of sitting down and eating.
That's how it used to be.
That's how it used to be, and that's the way halacha wants you to treat it.
Even though it's not Shabbos.
In general, treat your eating with respect. Don't just walk off and eat. Sit down and eat. Even like if you read the halachas we learned the halachas about a person's eating a cookie and a coffee, and he walks away and has to make a new bracha, and the halachas saying don't walk away because you have to make a bracha.
Those were all meant to.
Right? It was meant to sit down, have your coffee and your cookie, and then when you're done, you leave. It's a modern thing where we walk around snacking on bags of chips, but the halacha doesn't like that sort of behavior. If you can give the halacha likings and preferences, it would seem that the halacha doesn't like that kind of behavior.
So when we sit down sometimes on a Sunday, we order pizza for all the kids. and us.
I wouldn't go making all the kids wash.
No,
But certainly if you want to do it properly, you should wash, sit down, eat your slice, your two, bench, and then that's it.
It's one thing to eat and run, but not to run and eat.
To eat and run, not to eat, run and eat. Yeah, that's good. That's a good way of putting it.
But I don't say mizonos.
If
I'm eating 2 pieces, 3 pieces.
Especially the pizza shop here, which makes very, very thick crust.
Yeah.
You reach the threshold very quickly.
So I'm doing all wrong.
I would say Chas v'Shalom, you're doing it wrong because there's plenty that would allow you.
Was good.
There's definitely legs to rely on to make mizonos on this kind of pizza. There are legs to support it, but certainly the best case is to, especially in the context of eating supper, right?
If any of you know, by the way, of any wine that is organic and has the least amount of sulfite, really interesting.
I recently saw one. I actually recently saw one.
I know someone who makes it by himself.
Try.
Mandy Rosenfeld makes his wine.
Makes his own homemade wine, yeah.
There's no sulfite in it. He makes. No, I don't think he sells it.
Anyway, I think we're going to pick up, God willing, after Rosh Hashanah. Because tomorrow is Rosh Hashanah. There's a longer davening, and there's Torahs Nedarim afterwards. So we're going to pick up, God willing, on probably Tuesday, because Rosh Hashanah is Shabbos Sunday. Monday is going to be a fast day, and then we'll pick up Tuesday, God willing. So we'll take the opportunity to wish everybody happy, healthy, and a sweet new year, a meaningful and successful Rosh Hashanah, and
you as well.
for everyone.
For the
I was listening to a recording of the Rebbe speaking. This was the night before Rosh Hashanah. It was a Saturday night that year, 1978. So Lamed Ches going into Lamed Tes. And the first talk that we were speaking about Atam Nitzavim, the parsha, and everyone was going on about how the Atam Nitzavim, where God says, you all stand firmly today, which is, we always read that right before Rosh Hashanah. We read it last week. You all stand firmly today. And they were talking about how that statement is a guarantee. We all stand firmly in judgment and successful, quoting a bunch of sources for this idea. And then everyone went on to say, and we're verbalizing this, that was explaining, one of the intents and the reasons for this vibrating, for this gathering, is so that we can verbalize this notion that Hashem guarantees a successful judgment for everyone. And by verbalizing it, that in and of itself brings the guarantee that there should be a successful and healthy and good verdict and outcome for everyone. And never goes on to say, and this verdict should extend to all those present at this gathering, all those who are listening to the live hookup, wherever they are, and all those who will listen to the recording later. This will give them the guarantee, because we verbalized it, and we verbalized the words of Torah that indicate that Hashem guarantees that every Jew gets a happy and healthy, sweet year. That verbalization itself will guarantee the success of the verdict. So with Hashem's help, we're verbalizing it here. You heard it here first. Hashem guarantees, God willing, that every single Jew gets a happy, healthy, sweet new year, materially, spiritually, at every level. And as I like to say, we should all be blessed with stress-free success.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful day, Eden.
We should be well. If anybody gets